No matter if the learning event you are conducting is a lecture, lesson, role play, or case study, there are specific duties that you, the instructor, must perform for all of them. You will need to adapt your skills for the various learning environments. You will also need to ensure that you have all the proper lesson materials needed in order to conduct your training plan. In this session of the Help Center Certified Trainer Program, we will discuss the duties of the instructor in the learning process and the materials needed to conduct the lesson. Here are some proven techniques to design and conduct a successful lesson plan for a training session. First, tell participants what you're going to cover. Introduce your session with a brief overview of the training subject's main points. Next, tell them the information. In the main portion of the session, explain key points, go over policies, demonstrate procedures, and relate any other information trainees need to know. Next, tell them what you told them. Conclude with a summary of your opening overview. Use repetition to help trainees grasp and retain information. Next, use as much hands-on training as possible. The most effective training uses all the senses to affect learning. Demonstrate and apply teaching points to create greater understanding and knowledge of the subject. Finally, test frequently. Build in questions for your lesson plan to test knowledge and retention. Building a lesson plan requires an instructor to understand the material that needs to be covered and the objectives of the training. Here are 6 steps for building a successful lesson plan. First, know your objective. At the beginning of every lesson, write your lesson plan goal at the top. It should be incredibly simple. Second, write your overview. Use broad strokes to outline the big ideas for the training session. Third, plan your timeline. If there's a lot to cover in a fixed amount of time, break your plan into sections that you can speed up or slow down to accommodate changes as they happen. Fourth, get to know your students. Identify clearly who you are going to educate. What is their learning style? Visual, auditory, tactile, or a combination? What might they already know? And where might they be deficient in their knowledge? Focus your plan to fit the overall group of participants you have in class. Fifth, use multiple student interaction patterns. Some students do well on their own, others in pairs, and yet others in big groups. So long as you're letting them interact and build off each other, you're doing your job. But since each student is different, try to allow opportunities for all types of interactions. Your students and the cohesion of the class will be the better for it. And finally, address a variety of learning styles. You're bound to have some students that can't sit through a 25-minute video, and others who can't be bothered to read a 2-page excerpt from a policy. So do them a service by switching up your activities to utilize every student's abilities. It is important that as a trainer, you are aware of the training objectives for each training session. In planning out the training session, you need to be aware of what it is you want participants to learn and what skills you want them to be able to perform at the end of the training session. In other words, you should build your training session around providing the required information and time to test new knowledge and skills in order to build confidence. When developing your training session plan, keep in mind the aims of the lesson, objectives for the lesson, and the required learning outcome. Aims, objectives, and learning outcomes provide a clear indication of the goals and purpose of the training. Trainers use them to focus the training and to assess performance and success of participants. Participants can use them to evaluate the training from their own perspective. We have covered this in an earlier session. But it is important to examine how aims, objectives, and learning outcomes can be tied into the development of lesson plans and lesson materials. Aims are overall statements of what you hope the training event will achieve. Writing learning aims is a fairly straightforward process. Keep your language clear and precise, and try not to have too many little aims. Avoid ambiguity or aims that might be open to interpretation. The aim should also be learner-centered, so that the training can be structured in such a way as to meet the aim of the training for the individual learner. These should be directly inserted into your lesson plan so that you can ensure the aim is accomplished. Objectives are more specific statements of what you will present to the participants. Writing learning objectives is also fairly straightforward. Keep your language clear and precise, and try not to have too many little objectives. Avoid ambiguity or objectives that might be open to interpretation. The objective should also be learner-centered so that the training is structured in such a way to meet both the objective of the training and the objective for the individual learner. These should be directly inserted into your lesson plan so that you can ensure the objective is accomplished. Learning outcomes are a set of statements setting out what the participant should be able to do or understand by the end of the training event. Learning outcomes need to be more detailed than aims and objectives. They also need to be more carefully crafted to ensure that the outcome as stated is achievable in the context of the training you are presenting. These should be directly inserted into your lesson plan so that you can ensure the learning outcomes are accomplished. Learning outcomes must be clear and precise, be learner-centered, specify an outcome that can be observed or measured, and be realistic and achievable. Successful trainers develop a lesson plan before they begin teaching a lesson. A lesson plan is an organized description of the activities and resources you'll use to guide a group toward a specific learning objective. It details the subject matter that you'll teach, how long each section should take, the method of instruction for each topic covered, and the measures you'll use to check that people have learned what you need them to learn. You should also match learning activities and presentations to lesson objectives. It can be as simple as a brief outline or more complex with scripts, prompts, and a list of questions that you plan to ask. There are 5 main steps to create a successful lesson plan. First, you want to define training objectives, clarify key topics and related concepts, structure your presentation, assess learning, and then finally consider timing. Let's look at each of these in a little bit more detail. The first thing a trainer needs to do when creating a lesson plan is define the session's training objective. To specify what participants will learn, the objective should be measurable and expressed in terms of the desired skill or behavior, the conditions in which the skill is utilized, and a benchmark to measure the new skill or behavior learned against. In other words, the objective of the training is where you want the participant to end up at the end of the training lesson or session. So, if you are teaching them how to use a new system, the learning objective does not need to be mastery of the system, but it should indicate a level of familiarity and an ability with the system. Clarify key topics and related concepts. List and order all points you need to cover and the order you will cover them in. Your class will focus on a few central ideas or skills, but you'll need to explain related concepts to reach your learning objectives. Consider themes and topics that are covered in past training sessions or will be covered in future sessions so that you can reinforce past learning and foretell future applications of the skills in future learning sessions. Think about how you will present the material. Engage participants using several different approaches and apply them in different ways. Leverage a variety of tools creatively, such as group discussions, role play, group teaching, and online tools. Once you have a general idea of what you need to cover, draft a lesson outline. List all the points that you need to cover in the order in which you'll cover them. Consider participants' existing skills and knowledge and develop a template showing the training progression for the full training. This will help them put it into a personal context, which in turn will help them retain it better. Now, insert the information from your outline into your training plan template. Check back against your initial brainstorming document to make sure you're covering everything that you need to say. Also, compare your template with your objectives for the session to make sure that you'll achieve each and every one of them. Include ways to assess that participants are learning the skills you are training them on. Make time to check learning progress and retention. Assess before, during, and after training is completed. Think about when you'll check the students have understood key points. Build in learning checks and question and answer sessions and include these in your template. Think about the timing of your training session. Plan for concepts or skills that may take more time. Some concepts or skills will take more time to master than others, so identify these up front and allow students extra time to absorb or practice the material. Record the time that you will allocate for each concept or section on your training plan. And make sure that you've allowed plenty of time to focus on the core concepts. If you don't have enough time, you'll need to run additional sessions, or you'll need to narrow your learning objectives and reduce the number of topics that you plan to cover. There are 6 main duties of an instructor. These are to prepare, provide a scenario brief, monitor progress, debrief, evaluate, and then to provide a summary. Let's examine each of these in a little bit more detail. In the preparation stage, you need to determine how many students you will have, decide which students will perform each role, examine logistics. Do you have enough of the right equipment in working order, i.e. computer terminals, phones? Is there enough space? Conduct a walkthrough before beginning your training session. And then ensure that the exercises or scenarios that you'll be utilizing in the lesson actually meet the learning objectives. In providing a brief for a training scenario or a training operation, demonstrate any steps in a process or procedure. Learners may need to see you demonstrate the steps to learn how to complete them appropriately. Ensure you have their complete attention prior to the demonstration. Check for understanding. Wait until all points are covered prior to asking if anyone understands the directions. And then distribute any necessary material for the exercise. Distributing material too early will distract learners from listening to your brief, forcing you to rebrief or correct performance after the activity has begun. Do not distribute materials until after you have checked for understanding of the activity. In select instances, it may be necessary for you to distribute material before or during the brief. In this case, give learners a few moments to look them over before resuming your brief on the activity. Explain the purpose. What type of learning event is this? Why are you doing this activity or exercise? What is the desired learning outcome for this exercise? And then establish clear rules and requirements. Provide the background. Establish the setting. Make it realistic and relevant for your learners. Describe the background and characters involved in the activity. And describe the operational situation that the activity assumes that participants will be under. Tasks and timeline. Tell the learners exactly what is expected of them. Explain to the learners the sequence you expect them to follow during the training event. In some cases, these may be guidelines rather than exact steps. Monitor progress to ensure learning objectives are being met. Provide time checks so that students know how much time they've got left to complete a certain activity. Assess the involvement of participants and intervene or prompt as necessary. Debriefing allows you to encourage insightful discussion and provide feedback to participants. Active questions and general questions are formats to use for class debriefs after a training activity. Active questions. Participants should be provided an opportunity to discuss their reaction to the material. General questions. You could utilize small group discussion by assigning small groups and ask the members to discuss and present what they have learned. Or you could utilize open audience discussion. Invite the group as a whole to give reactions and feedback to the class on the training activity. Give learners guidelines on how to present their feedback. For example, give positive feedback first. Instructor observations are often the most valued feedback. Follow these guidelines when giving feedback as an instructor. Give constructive feedback even when correcting. And then own the feedback. For example, it seemed to me that you weren't quite sure what the customer was asking of you when you were answering their question on this telephone exercise. Then finally, recap the objective of the training event and any key points brought up during the discussion of how that training event operated. In this session, we discussed the need for lesson materials before starting a session, how to develop a lesson plan, and the expectations of you as an instructor in engaging your lesson plan and in providing training activities. Remember, as an instructor, preparing a lesson plan before starting a session that has taken into consideration the aims, objectives, and expected outcomes of the training session will ensure that the session is a success. In our next training session in the Help Center Certified Training Program, we will examine how to utilize case studies and scenarios when providing hands-on training.